It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. John Travaline, who will shed some insights into how to relate to one another in love, on a human level, and in the medical profession in particular. Dr. Travaline is a professor of medicine at Temple University School of Medicine. He earned his medical degree from Jefferson Medical College and completed his internship and residency at the University of Maryland Medical Center right here in Baltimore. He completed fellowship training in pulmonary and critical care medicine at Temple University Hospital. He is the author or co-author of more than 140 articles, abstracts, and book chapters. Currently, he is a candidate for the permanent diaconate in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, seeking to serve God in many ways. The title of his talk is Understanding Patient-Physician Relationships in View of Communio Personarum. Dr. John Travaline.
Thank you, Father. I'd like to also express my thanks to the organizers for inviting me to speak today. I'm indeed privileged to be here to share some thoughts about a topic which has been of enduring interest and importance to me. At the outset, let me say that I have no special claim. I am not a theologian, not a philosopher, and so I have no special authority in a sense on this matter. However, as a physician who has reflected a good deal about the theology of the body as it speaks to practical, day-to-day events, encounters, and relationships, particularly in the medical world, I think I can contribute some provocative thoughts. Hopefully, by the end of the presentation, answer the question posed in the title of this panel session, and also stimulate some conversation. I'd like to begin by briefly recounting my story in coming to this magnum opus of JP2, reminding us of how evangelization occurs in so many ways. So by way of my background in the theology of the body, it began at this very meeting 5 years ago. Christopher West's book captured my attention as it sat on the Pauline books and media table outside the meeting room. And his book enthralled me so much so that I sought to hear him speak at a young adults group in Philadelphia that following summer. I had to call first, and I did, the organizer to make sure that I would be able to attend this young adults group. And I did. And as I introduced myself to him, and he learned I was a physician, he said, "Oh, you have to read the entire work." And I said, "Okay." But quite frankly, it wasn't at the top of my reading list. I was pretty content with the insights that I had gained from the explained version. Later that fall, at a pro-life union dinner in Philadelphia, who was the keynote speaker? Of course, once again, Christopher West, and this time again on a table outside of the meeting room. This time there was a flyer announcing that a seminar was going to begin to take up the study of the theology of the body. So I inquired and enrolled in that seminar, and for just a little over a year, a small group of us met every other Tuesday evening for 2 hours and took up this important catechesis. In fact, our next speaker, Tara Seifer, now Plymouth, was the leader of that group. And after that seminar, I was more on fire about the theology of the body, particularly as I thought it would speak very importantly to what I did day to day in the practice of medicine. And it's about some of those reflections that I want to talk about today. While recovering in the hospital following the assassination attempt, John Paul II remarked that one of the problems, in fact, the danger with being a patient, is a threat to losing one's subjectivity. There's a tension he talked about between remaining a subject of one's illness and becoming an object of treatment. Over the next several minutes, I really want to touch upon John Paul's view of the human person as developed in the theology of the body and show its connection to how we can understand one another, particularly in the context of the medical profession, which is or should be viewed in its essence as the healing of the body person. And at the center of this healing activity, of course, is the relationship between the healer and the patient. To be a person is to be a member of a Communio Personarum. What does this mean? Well, it seems to claim that the essence of personhood is relationship, and relationship specifically with other persons. This understanding of the human person, this anthropology, if you will, is directly founded upon being created in the image and likeness of a relational, triune God. Further, this relationship is a relationship of love, or in other terms, of complete self-donation. The roots of this idea are found in the Vatican II document. We heard a little bit about this morning, Gaudium et Spes. In it, we read, and on your handouts, I excerpted some of these quotes for your pleasure. It says, "But God did not create man as a solitary, for from the beginning, male and female, he created them. Their companionship produces the primary form of interpersonal communion. For by his innermost nature, man is a social being, and unless he relates himself to others, he can neither live nor develop his potential. Indeed, the Lord Jesus, when he prayed to the Father that all may be one as we are one, opened up vistas closed to human reason, for he implied a certain likeness between the union of the divine persons and the unity of God's sons in truth and charity. This likeness reveals that man, who is the only creature on earth which God willed for itself, cannot fully find himself except through a sincere gift of himself. It is important for all of us who tend to the body in a healing manner to recognize that the essence of the body is to be a gift to another. And this notion finds its most clear expression in the context of marriage, as we just heard, wherein the nuptial meaning of the body is expressed. The nuptial meaning of the body is, of course, the body's capacity for expressing love and total self-gift. In marriage, this can occur through the reciprocity and complementarity of masculinity and femininity within the marital act, though the body is apt for self-gift in many ways and in many capacities, whether married or unmarried, and as we'll see, even in the patient-healer relationship. In a way, man is incomplete without the capacity for self-donation, and this of necessity involves the presence of another to whom this gift is made. John Paul II says, "The gift reveals, so to speak, a particular characteristic of personal existence, or rather of the essence of the person. When God Yahweh said, 'It is not good that man should be alone,' he affirmed that alone man does not completely realize his essence. He realizes it only by existing with someone, and even more deeply and completely by existing for someone. This capacity of self-gift requires the presence of and receptivity by another. In effect, marriage is the primordial Communio Personarum, a relationship between a man and a woman at the deepest level of shared humanity. But let's turn our attention to the physician and the patient for whom he cares. Regarding the relationship between physician and patient, there are at least two distinct aspects of the self-donation characteristic. First, the healer must be sensitive to the patient's disposition in allowing him or herself to be cared for by the physician. In this way, the patient is actually being a gift for the healer. He is giving the healer his vulnerability and an opportunity for service. In addition, the patient seeks to be restored and healed such that his purpose to be able to continue the vocation of self-gift to which we are all called can go on being fulfilled. The second important way in which self-donation is manifested in the healer-patient relationship concerns the opportunity for the healer to be a gift of self to the patient during each and every encounter. The healer, through his kindness, sensitive bedside manner, healing touch, gentle words, usage of his knowledge to benefit the patient, makes a true gift of himself in his practice of medicine. Understood in this way, the richness of John Paul's teaching is realized. The essence of love is in the gift of one to another and not in what one can achieve through the use of another. Indeed, man comes to discover his true self only in giving himself, and in the patient-healer relationship, the patient and healer come to know their true self. Now, when do we have opportunity to give ourselves and begin to form a communion of persons? Probably more times and in more ways than we can think. Many experiences in life afford us opportunities to be gift to one another. The healer especially is confronted constantly with opportunities for self-gift. And in order for a true disposition of self-gift by the healer to be manifested, it seems that there must be an appreciation of the dignity of the human person, created in God's image and willed for his own sake. Consider what Carl Anderson in his book writes. In every Good Samaritan situation, there is the invitation to give oneself and discover anew one's true self, a being created out of love in the image of a triune God, oriented toward others with a great capacity for love and therefore a greater capacity for joy. Our being in the likeness of God is manifested in our relationships with others in a community of persons because the likeness of God is a community of persons, Father, Son, and Spirit. Healers in a special way perhaps have the greatest or at least the most opportunity on a regular basis for realizing this anthropological truth. Consider what John Paul in his apostolic letter on suffering says. He talks about suffering being present in order to unleash love in the human person. Who is on the front line confronting much of the physical, emotional, and psychological suffering today? Nurses, doctors, therapists. And what about spiritual suffering that occurs? Priests, ministers, religious? In their call to the healing professions, they are all invited to enter into a communion of persons. Remember, too, the social and interhuman dimension of suffering. And because of this, there is an intimate relationship among suffering, communio, and the healing professions. Whenever an act of kindness or mercy is given to another and that act is accepted, a communion of persons is formed. One allows and accepts an act of mercy and healing, and one performs that act in gentleness and kindness, and both are giving something here. It is indeed a gift to be attended to and to be cared for by someone with the goal of comfort and healing, but it is also a gift to be the one that attends to the patient and to be given the opportunity to care for another. This is for several reasons. It is a gift to care for another because the other, in essence, is Christ. Then he will say to those on his left, "Out of my sight, you condemned, into that everlasting fire prepared for the devil and his angels." I was hungry and you gave me no food. I was thirsty and you gave me no drink. I was away from home and you gave me no welcome, naked and you gave me no clothing. I was ill and in prison and you did not come to comfort me. Then they in turn will ask, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or away from home or naked or ill or in prison and not attend to you in your needs? He will answer them, I assure you, as often as you neglected to do it to one of these least ones, you neglected to do it to me. It is a gift to care for another, because in giving oneself to another, by tending to them, one becomes an instrument of Christ's mercy. It is a gift to care for another, because it is an honor when another person allows himself to be vulnerable in front of another, which can be quite difficult and humiliating for the patient to do sometimes, especially in this age and culture when confidence, invincibility, and independence are so prized. It is a gift to care for another because of the basic rewarding feeling that one gets when one ministers to another in need. For all of these reasons, it is indeed a gift to be the healer. And in the interaction between healer and patient, a communion of persons is formed. The patient, though, is also called to self-gift. Again, we can look to John Paul and how he asked patients repeatedly to offer their sorrows and suffering and self-gift for others' intentions, especially for the church. Indeed, the church is full of people who have a great spiritual need for souls to offer their pains for them. In this way, suffering becomes redemptive and transformative. The patient makes himself vulnerable. The healer senses this and responds with extra gentleness and sensitivity, which is conveyed in a gentle touch, a soft and soothing tone of voice, so as to convey both that he is grateful to the patient for allowing himself to be vulnerable, and to try to convey to the patient that he, the healer, is worthy of this trust and that the patient has given to him. The patient has essentially given the healer his body. It is the healer's for a few moments to inspect, to touch, to treat. With this trust, the healer is to gather information, diagnose, and apply treatment. The patient has also given to the healer his psyche, in a sense. He is saying to the healer, I trust in you. I will listen to what you say, to your diagnosis. Then even after our encounter is over, I will continue my gift of trust to you because our relationship will continue in my carrying out your prescription. In this way, the gift of the healer to the patient is continued also after their initial encounter, and even when they are not in each other's physical presence. The communion of persons is fruitful when doctor and patient can come together and give to one another in this way. It is thus fruitful and helpful for both, even when the healer has perhaps been unable to cure the patient. The kindness and trust given on both sides remains as a palpable, spiritually healing and generative action, despite possible continuation of disease or injury. We are all created to self-gift and to fruitfulness. Our inner relationality inspires us to reach forth to others and to form communions of persons. When a healer can remember this and embody it in his work, and when patients can respond to a kind healer with openness and trust and forgiveness when treatment may not turn out as well as was hoped for, they are able to fulfill this call to be gifts to one another and to form a Communio Personarum. Now, having been so influenced and sensitized as I am to many of John Paul's teachings, I cannot help to view medical practice but through a particular lens which focuses on personhood. Let's look at a few examples in the world of clinical medicine that, as I interpret, have some connection with Communio Personarum. First, consider the provision of artificial hydration and nutrition to a patient in a state of permanent unconsciousness. Such an action clearly affirms the value and dignity of the patient as a person, and in the very act of caring for the person, solidarity is maintained with the person, and the true meaning of compassion is realized. Indeed, as Christians, we know that suffering has a special place in God's saving plan. It is, in fact, a sharing in Christ's passion and a union with the redeeming sacrifice, which he offered in obedience to his Father's will. This notion of maintaining solidarity, communion, or connectedness with a patient is critical to understanding the patient-physician relationship as reflecting Communio Personarum. Doing so affirms the dignity of the person and promotes a good realized by both physician and patient, even if the patient is in a state of permanent unconsciousness and even if the patient may not perceive benefit. The second example. Consider the impact of spousal health on the caregiving spouse's own health and mortality. This was the subject of an article in the New England Journal of Medicine where nearly 520,000 couples, over 1 million people, were studied to explore this relationship. Over 730,000 spouses were hospitalized at least once over 9 years of observation. And without getting into the details of the study, the bottom line was that hospitalization of a spouse is associated with an increased risk of death of the caregiving spouse. Doesn't this seem to reveal some profound truth about complete self-donation of spouses? Now, certainly there may be many explanations for this phenomenon. However, I use this data to emphasize the connectedness of persons, in essence, an example of Communio Personarum, in that this study concerns spouses, the nuptial union. Isn't this the primordial Communio Personarum? Just last week, one of my patients with chronic illness became precipitously worse, ending up in the intensive care unit requiring life-sustaining treatments. He was urgently listed for lung transplantation. What was very moving to me in the last hours of his life was how he gave himself over to the doctors and nurses to help him. Lying motionless on the bed, connected to life support systems, he was, in a way, giving himself to the healers, as we've been talking about. But in addition, in the end, when he died before receiving lung transplantation, his longtime close friend and family physician commented that the patient really didn't want to proceed with transplantation. He had accepted his terminal condition and was at peace with that decision. But in the last few days, as he was getting worse, for his wife and for his children, he fully accepted and agreed to proceeding with transplantation. His friend said he did it for his family. I thought, wow, even in his dying, he was giving of himself. He did it for his family. And as it turned out, after he died, he donated his organs. His lungs went to science, but other organs to more immediate benefit for other persons. And lastly, from the clinical literature in the archives of internal medicine, over 12,000 patients were studied with respect to their satisfaction with physician care. The authors found that if someone accompanied the patients, so-called visit companions, that patients were more satisfied with their interaction and relationship with their physician and their physician's care of them. Here again is evidence demonstrating an aspect of the communion of persons and the benefit of self-giving. Patients accompanied by another person. Patients caring for their families, even in their illness. Persons caring for patients, even when the patient has no awareness. All are manifestations of Communio Personarum, evident in our clinics, ICUs, hospitals, and nursing care homes every day. Now, so far, I think much of what I have said, especially to an audience that I suspect is mostly receptive to many of these ideas, has been rather positive and upbeat. There may even be a preaching to the choir effect operative here. I want to acknowledge, however, the overarching theme of this meeting, which is modern challenges to health, conscience, and human dignity. At least with regard to human dignity, I wish to offer the following thoughts. However, instead of challenges, I would like to use the term threats, a term that I think more accurately describes the matter about which I will discuss. Now, I recognize a hostility that is sometimes incited by debates surrounding certain issues and an understanding of certain truths. But I want to touch upon some of the present-day realities that threaten human freedom, assail human personhood, and blur the distinctions between men and women as created uniquely in the image and likeness of God. By discussing the challenges as threats, I want to impassion our organization to intensify its education and evangelization efforts so as to preserve and protect authentic God-given freedom. Sadly, it seems that for the most part, medical professions do not unanimously thwart these realities, and it falls to organizations like the CMA to fight against these anti-person, anti-life forces and work to preserve a culture of life, to uphold authentic freedom, and to convey hope in the midst of suffering. Society at large does not seem to understand fully who we are as persons. We just heard this. Ironically, for as smart as we are, for as technologically advanced we appear, and for as enlightened as we claim to be, we really do not understand one another. Now, admittedly, some have a better understanding than others, but overall, if we look to the medical profession and all that is occurring in medical science and in medical clinical practice, we seem to be more confused than ever as to who we are. Let's look at some of the countervailing forces in our society, some of the issues and practices that deride human person as created male and female in the image of God. I present these threatening issues separated into three categories based on the primary mechanism by which they destroy authentic meaning of personhood. Category 1, issues that blur the distinction between man and woman. Here we have practicing homosexuality, homosexual agendas, including same-sex marriage and domestic partnership arrangements, gender reassignment surgery. Category 2, issues that see the person as primarily an object. Here we have certain organ procurement practices for organ transplantation, perhaps donation after cardiac death, embryonic stem cell research and development, abortion, euthanasia, physician-assisted suicide. In category 3, issues that rupture Communio Personarum. Here we have contraception, various reproductive technologies, in vitro fertilization and the like, and perhaps also an erosion of medical professionalism that's infiltrating medical training grounds. What should be our response to such threats? Can the theology of the body help us understand one another? The theology of the body exposes these practices in our society and our profession as lies about who we are. And because they are lies, we can be duped, in this case, duped into sustaining a death culture. The theology of the body tells us that same-sex marriage and gender reassignment are incompatible with who we truly are. God is Trinity, and in his image we therefore must be relational, and we are. Theology of the body tells us that certain organ procurement practices, embryonic stem cell research, and physician-assisted suicide are direct frontal assaults on the person created for love relationships. Persons who are not to be used as commodity, who are not to be discarded as useless or unwanted. Theology of the body tells us that various reproductive technologies also are lies, breaking down the truth of man and woman made for nuptial relationship. To answer the question posed in the title of this session, yes. Yes, John Paul's theology of the body absolutely can help us understand one another. In fact, it really is not that difficult. And as we are seeing in this conference and through innumerable other venues for the dissemination of this teaching, the core message of the theology of the body is pretty easy to grasp. It does not presuppose many things. In fact, it only presupposes one truth: faith in one triune God. I hope that through this presentation I've been able to express some thoughts as to how the theology of the body relates to an understanding of one another, and particularly as that understanding can be realized in the field of medicine. That healing and restoration of the body falls most prominently to physicians. Perhaps it is most fitting that those of us in the healing profession take a lead role in offering solutions to problems of the body, incorporating an integrative view of the person as packaged and delivered in John Paul II's theology of the body. Thank you.